Okay, so today we're going to talk about f-stops, EVs, and the exposure range on the GH2. Let me preface this by saying that I have I guess you could call him a student or a pupil of mine, a guy who has come to grip for me and AC for me on different sets, and he wants to be a filmmaker. And so he really was liking this what we were doing, with the GH2. So he went out and bought one, and he bought some really nice lenses and a cage and uh, basically just a ton of gear and really expensive lights, and went out and shot a short film. And then came to me with the footage and was perplexed as to why certain shots looked the way they did, and why he couldn't seem to, even in color correction, get his stuff to look the way he wanted to. And I had to tell him, look, you have to light it. If you want it to look that way, you have to light for that, and then you have to understand what you can and can't do to that footage in post. So I wanted to I started to talk to him about dynamic range, about how the camera handles dynamic range, and then I realized I didn't really know what the dynamic range of the camera was. I didn't know. I'd been lucky, I guess, so far that I'd been shooting with it and not knowing what the full potential of the camera was, and had just basically been using the exposure meter at 50% for skin tone, which is actually really low. So when I was pulling my footage into After Effects and looking at it in Color Finesse, I was shocked to find that the footage was not necessarily underexposed, but always sort of tended to sit in the lower part of the tonal range on the spectrograph. So I set up a shot, which I'll show you in a second in After Effects, and I used f14 to get completely crushed blacks, f6.3 for the mid range, so that I could get the shot to cover the full range of what at least the EV meter would show, and then open it up to f2.0 so that I could see just how far up it would go if I could get detail in pure in above point or above +3. And of course I couldn't. So what I discovered was that these ranges here are pretty much the dynamic range of the camera. It's about a distance of 8 1/3 stops from pure black to pure white on the GH2. Now, if you were to look at film here, this is your typical exposure range on film. Now, we obviously have all of these f-stops available to us on the camera, but we cannot expose from complete pure wide open 0.7 to completely stop down 22 on the GH2 in one shot. You won't get detail all the way across the spectrum, and for the most part you can't really with film either. But film does claim to have a dynamic range of 11 stops between the whitest white, pure white, no detail in the highlights, to pure black, no detail in the blacks. And these, of course, all these green numbers here are full stops on your lens, and the ones in between are third stops. And most DSLRs, most cameras, most video cameras that we have access to are going to be demarcated in third stop increments. So now that you're familiar with this, we'll go into this more in detail as far as what f-stops are, but you should know this a little bit. If you don't know, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you should probably go and take a photography course, or maybe one online, do some research, and find out just how these control light and how they correlate to ISOs. Because doubling your ISO, in other words, if you start at an ISO of 200 and double it to 400, you add one full stop of exposure to your camera. In other words, let's say you're underexposed by one stop on your image, and you're like, oh, I don't want to open up the lens anymore because I don't want to lose my focus range, or I don't have any more light to add. You can boost the ISO by doubling it from 200 to 400 and gain one full stop of exposure back. In other words, let's say you're at -3 here, and you're whatever you're reading here. Let's say you're reading a curtain in the background, and you're like, wow, that's going to be broadcast black. That's not even going to read. But I don't have any more light to throw on it, and I want to expose it. I want to get it up to like -2, so I have a little bit of detail involved. You can boost the ISO from 200 to 400, and that will give you this meter will jump from -3 to -2. You'll gain 1 stop. So our findings in the test show that at +3, which is when this is reading instead of -3 all the way down, it's reading at a +3, you are at pure white, which means there is 0 detail at that point in your image at +3. Optimal, most of us know that to get optimal skin tone, you want to be around the 60 to 65 range is a good range for skin tones. So between a stop to a stop and a third will get you between 60 and 70%. I was obviously exposing at 50%, which is why my images were so dark. 0 is 50%. -1 and a third is 30% black. Or 30 IRE. And I feel, in my experience, 30% black is kind of like anything that's black in the room that if you fill the room with smoke will start to read at around 30 to 33%, which will actually give you detail. You can actually work with that. You can crush it back down to black if you want, or if you want to bring detail out of it and do power windows and such. It's really great to have 30%. -3 is where 7 IRE comes in, so this -3 here is broadcast black. And then -5 and a third is pure black. There's 0 detail. All of your detail is gone. And that gives us a stop range of, from +3 to -3 of 6, then add 2 and a third more. That's 8 and 1/3 stops of dynamic range on the GH2. So it's not quite film. In fact, it's quite lacking, and it's definitely not in the red range. So we'll get back to these numbers in a second. Let's go ahead and go into After Effects and see that test. Okay, so here we are in After Effects, and this is the test that I did. Obviously, I took a light and shined it across this projection screen here. I took some painter's tape so I wouldn't screw up my friend's really nice screen here in his home theater here, and just took the 650 and RE650 and blasted it into the screen and got pretty close. You can actually see over here that when I put the mouse over here that I'm pretty close to a 1 on the exposure, which means I'm just under +3. So I actually have detail in here. So if I were to, let's say, grab this footage and here, let's turn these on. Let's get rid of these. And color finesse, we're going to need that because we're going to peer into this image in a second. But if I were to, let's say, grab the input white and bring this down, which is going to mute everything quite a bit, you can see that there's detail in here. So if there was actually anything in here that had any detail, I'd still be able to bring that out. Okay, so you can see here that here are my 3 tests: the f2, f6.3, and f11. f2, of course, is all blown out. It's our highest range, the lens wide open. f11, the lens stopped down to extremes, and then f6.3, which is kind of in the middle. So you can see that according to our chart here, that on f6.3, the middle part here is reading around 0, which would be about the start of your skin tones. Center right, it reads +1 to 1/3 from this side to that side. From here, it's reading 2 and a third, and then here it's reading right around, it reads +3 on the EV meter. Although I do still have a little bit of detail left in there. But when I go to the very top of 0.3, as you'll see here, that on this test, this is the high range, the f2. That this far point over here reads at 0, and then we start going into +1, +2, into +3, and then this is, you can even see the circle here because of the color banding, that this whole area right here, there's no detail left in the white area here. This is completely blown out, 0 detail. And of course those readings are +3, +5, +7, and +8 respectively. Because of the blue, there's zero detail. I mean, there's detail here where you can see it, but most of this is completely unrecoverable because it's way beyond +3. It's above 100 IRE. And then of course if we come down here, this is stopped down to 11, and you can see in the 11 range, or I'm sorry, wow, stopped down to F14, my bad, that here in this area we're reading around 0, and then -3, -1 1/3, -3, so this is like broadcast black, which is the center, and then, or I'm sorry, 10% broadcast black, 4% here, and then pure black begins over here at 5 1/3 under. So let's look at those in color finesse so we can take a look. In fact, let's go to this is probably the best example because it does cover, for the most part, the full range. I mean, this is pure black all the way over here. And then this is pretty close to pure white all the way over here, and then 50% is running in right around here. So let's go into color finesse. Let's turn these levels off. So I'm not going to use them. And full interface. So the cool thing you'll notice about these tape marks is how they correlate, or how they look on the spectrograph, is they actually show up, look at this, on the spectrograph as lines because they're so completely different from everything else in the image. So you can see all the way over here, I'm buttoned up right against 100 IRE, and above this line is pure white. There is no super white on this camera, zero detail. So, and that correlates, and as it comes over each strip of tape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stripes of tape, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stripes of tape. And you can see at this point we're at 0, which is the very edge of the image, which is actually the edge of the projection screen, which is black. But you can see some detail in here, and so as you look at this image, you see detail in this black area, not a lot. And you can see, even though we're below broadcast black, which is this line right here, we do still have, this is kind of where our image is falling. But you can just follow the curve all the way up and see if, well, skin tone's supposed to be around 60 or so, that I'd want to expose right on the other side of here, which according to our chart is between 0, which is in the center here, and 1 1/3, which is the center of this. So your skin tone range would fall in between the 0 to +1 and 1/3. And above that, you know, you're getting into 70%, as we can see from here. So like 70% starts about right here in the middle of that. So I was wrong. So 70 is reading 1 1/3. So 1 would probably read around 60. And I think I determined that it was 16 IRE between for each stop. So if this is reading 0 at 50 and we want to be at around 60 to 63, one stop over would put us around 66. So if you could, you know, this is why you need an actual light meter. But if you just want to get it close in the range, if you go between 2/3 over and a stop over, will get you right around 60, and then a stop and a third is going to push you all the way up to 70. And then of course, so pure black, and you can see this 30% range that I was talking about, which is right here, which would be in this area. That's where I like to keep my blacks if I'm going to do detail work. And you're like going, wow, that doesn't look black to me at all. And of course, yeah, that's right. But when you start to get down into this area here, which according to our chart is below 20 and getting down into broadcast black, you're going to get a lot of noise, and there's not much you can do with this. If you try to pump up the shadows here and get detail, you're not going to be happy with the results. So if you want to if you're doing a crushing type thing, which I'll show you here in a second, you want to get those blacks up there as much as you possibly can, because of the dynamic range of, I'm not sure if it's the camera or the codec or the sensor or what it is, but you do not have quite as big of a dynamic range as maybe you thought you did. Definitely not the same dynamic range as film or the red. So let's see what these look like here. One of the things you'll notice is that everything in this sort of circle area here is just peaked. You just look at that, bang! It's just slammed right up against it. In fact, this strip of tape, you can see just a little bit of detail in it right here, when the rest of it is just lost. Most of the detail on this tape is gone. A little bit of detail on this tape is gone, and this piece of tape in the middle here, which would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, has a full range of detail available to you in your spectrograph. And of course, blasts all the way down to here, and down in this range over here, we're reading around 30%. So you can see there's not a lot of difference, or at least dynamic range, between 30% black, which is great for doing extensive detail work in shadows, and being completely blown out. I don't know why AE is talking to me, but it is. So I think that gives you. Then let's go ahead and look at the number 2 over here. And you can see this is stopped down to 14, F14, and you can see you can't see anything over here. But if we go into, and like I said, this like right around here is reading 50%. So let's see. Yeah. Okay, so we're at 60%. Right around our skin tone range here. And then you can see there's a little bit of detail in this area here, and that's still below broadcast black. But broadcast black is hitting. I guess we hit broadcast black like right on the other side of this 4th piece of tape. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So right here is what broadcast considers black. But then you're not hitting pure black till you get over here, in which you get a complete loss of detail. So we're coming down from 50 is about here, it looks like. So between here, and then it's going about a stop each. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a third before you hit 0 detail, and that's your dynamic range on the GH2. I'm sure that'll be helpful to you. But how does that correlate to color correction, which is the part that we will get into next? This is a shot on Quantum version 2 that I shot this past week for a short, directed by my good friend Scalithan Essex. And here's you want to see the raw. Here's the raw image, and then of course this is graded here in ColorGhear to give it quite a bit more density and a little bit better skin tone and some brighter colors and such. Use the gears that I use, just a little bit of toner to desaturate it, and this toner is just on his face, and then this toner is on the whole thing. Density, a little bit of crush, and then some spectral enhance over the top, which I almost never do, but in this case, once I was done with everything, I just wanted to kind of bring the colors back out. But we were talking about EVs, and part of EVs, well, if you're wondering what an EV is, your light meter, the way that it works is it evaluates your light in and measures it in something called EVs. And then the EVs plug into basically what amounts to a lookup table, in which you give the light meter 2 parameters, and it will produce a third. So you give it your ISO and shutter speed, and it'll tell you what f-stop you need to be at to have a proper exposure. And then, or you can plug in the f-stop and the shutter speed, and it'll tell you what ISO you need to be at. Or you can plug in the ISO and the aperture, and it will tell you what shutter speed you need to be at. Although for us, when we're shooting film, you kind of want to keep your shutter around 1/50th. For a it should be 1/48th really, but there isn't a 1/48th setting on the GH2 for your standard film at 24p. So you would really only want to know if you want to shoot at a certain f-stop. If you want to shoot wide open at 1/50th, what ISO should I be at to get a proper exposure with the reading that I'm getting. So that's how your light meter essentially works. But the light meter in the GH2, of course, gives us those EV ratings, and we can interpret f-stops from that. And in this case, this image, the key side of his face read out at about like 1 over. I think it was actually right around. It kept blinking between 2/3 and 1 stop over, or 1 EV over, and the dark side of his face read even at 0. Hers read just at, like, I think it was blinking between 1/3 and 2/3 over. And then of course this is just bordering on being completely blown out, which I kind of lucked out with, that it wasn't entirely blown out, so I was able to get a little bit of detail, or retain some detail there. In fact, let's look at the raw image. You can see that even the light coming out of the kitchen and sort of shining on this wall over here is giving us at least a little bit of detail. And of course I crushed it down, you get this nice, I reference Blade Runner a lot because it's one of my favorite movies, speaking of cinematography and framing and color and lighting. So when I say something looks like Blade Runner, that means I like it. No, and I like it a lot. Okay, but let's analyze this image. So here's our raw image, and it's full frame, full 16:9. You can see the little moonlight on her shoulder. That's coming from one of the lights. And if we go over here to the spectrograph, just to sum up again with the spectrograph reads in sort of 1 pixel to, I don't even know what the range is. We'll just call it 1 pixel. It could be 1 pixel, 10 pixels, I'm not sure. But vertical slices of your image from left to right. So all of this data is based on what you see in your image, starting all the way to the left, here, which is, darkness and a little bit of, highlights, moving all the way to the left. And you can see that this right here, right around 30, is what this is reading over here. And of course his face, if we look over here, is right between 60 and 70, which is where we want it. And then the shadow side of his face is about 16 IRE less, which equates to about 1 stop. So we've got a 1 stop difference, or what's called a 2-to-1 ratio. And you're like, but Cheyenne, where did that come from, this 2-to-1 ratio of yours? Well, anytime you have a 1 stop difference in your exposure, that is considered a contrast ratio of 2 to 1. And every time you increase that or double that, it doubles again. So if you have if it were a 2-stop ratio between, in other words, if this were reading, say, 1 stop over, which is kind of where we would want it, and this was a stop under, that would be a 2-stop difference, which would be a 4-to-1 ratio. And then of course, 3 stops would be 8-to-1, 4 stops 16-to-1. 16-to-1 is pretty harsh. I mean, that's a lot of your like film noir, classic black and white type stuff, where you can see, even like for more modern references, well, it's 30 years old now, but as the Sting video for Every Breath You Take, where one side of Sting's face is pure black and the other side is illuminated. That's like a 16-to-1 ratio. I mean, it's like no detail on one side and nice and bright on the other side. I don't ever shoot in a 16-to-1. I like 16-to-1. I like crushing into 16-to-1 in post, but I never shoot that. I usually shoot 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 when I shoot. But you can also see her face and shoulder is reading in that close to 60 range. You can see it's slightly under, but it actually works. At least I got it close. And then of course our highlights here back in the kitchen are reading way up around, bumping up against 100 IRE. Some of it's blown out, which means I've lost detail. You can actually see in this, I believe in this area here, in here there's no detail at all. But that's our window back there, and I get the same thing coming from the window behind the bottles here, where it's bumped up into the 80 range, which means I still got detail there if I wanted to mess with it. But yeah, so that's kind of how the EVs correlate to your spectrograph and your readings. And you really want to get familiar with this, because the more you do it, the more familiar you become with it, the more creative you can be. You can say, well, I know when I get into ColorGhear and I start crushing things or I start moving things around or adjusting things, that as long as I've got like 30 to 40% on somebody's hair or something in the background, I could power window that down or up or do whatever I want to do with it. Um, you you know that if you want highlights to be blown out and or if you want to keep them like just under blown out and then be able to do super white stuff, because once you get into 32-bit color space in After Effects, you can start to do some of those super white effects. I'm not going to get into them now because it's a long conversation that we have to have. But you can get lights, especially lights in the background, to look really really cool as long as you maintain them. If you blow them out, they're gone. But if they're not completely blown out, you can really start to spike them up above what's considered pure white, and to create some really cool effects. And you can just look up the super white type effects on the internet and you'll see what I'm talking about. But eventually I will have a tutorial to cover that. But one of the things I want to cover in this tutorial still is a preview of things to come, which is eventually shots like this will be done specifically for ColorGhear and for the website, and you'll be able to see how I light them. In other words, you'll be able to see the background, you'll be able to see behind the scenes of what the background looked like, and then all this is the stuff that we kind of really wanted when we were first learning how to do all this stuff, which is you really wished that somebody would have, when you're watching the behind the scenes and you're watching the image, you could have seen what it looked like. Just put these guys in there, put our actors, this actor here and this actor here in this spot, and turn on the camera without any lights on them, just to see what it looks like. And then start adding your lights. Add your key light and your fill light and the rim lights and the hair lights and the background lights, and see how the whole thing goes together, step by step. It's kind of how they do effects breakdowns. And then see what it was you had to work with. See what the space was like. Why was it lit that way? And coming soon to ColorGhear will be a full tutorial series in which you will actually get to see that. You'll actually get to see behind the scenes. You'll actually get to see me light and explain what I'm doing while I'm lighting the shot. And then see a final, short clip. It'll probably be a scene. Probably won't be longer than a minute, minute and a half. Shot with a GH2 with that particular lighting, and then of course graded in ColorGhear, so that you can see, can begin to learn some of the techniques that I've learned over the past 12 years that I've been doing this. But to explain this shot, this is lit with there's a little softbox behind her head. Probably, if we were in space, it would probably be the stand would be about right here. And it's turned on. It's got a diffusion gel on it. It's called a storm light. I didn't name it. My friend did. It's because I designed it and built it, and I will show you how to build them in the tutorial series that's coming. But it's here. It's just got a diffusion gel laid over the top of it. I think I've got unscrewed most of the bulbs. It's got 10 bulbs in it, so it goes from 100 watts to 1,000 watts, and it's all CFLs. And it's really a handy little light, super lightweight. But that's what's keying him from over here. This light on her face and her shoulder, which is also filling him. If we zoom in, in fact, let me bring up my hand tool so I can bring him over here and zoom in. If we look here in his eye, you can actually see there's these two little highlights here, and then of course these two little highlights here, both coming from the same light, which is a 2-foot fluorescent fixture that I bought at a hardware store. You do want to buy, if you're going to buy flow fixtures to shoot with, make sure you get an electronic ballast, not a magnetic. If you get a magnetic ballast, it will flicker and there's nothing you can do about it. Doesn't matter if you change the shutter speed, nothing will fix it. You cannot get in sync with a magnetic ballast. It will just flicker. It'll ruin your shot. So make sure you get electronic ballast. All CFL fixtures have electronic ballasts built in, so you're fine with those. But this was just a simple 2-foot 24-inch flow fixture that I bought at a hardware store for like 12-15 bucks, and then a little $5 cool white fluorescent tube screwed into it. That's sitting on the bar itself. Let me zoom back out so we can kind of get a reference. But that's just sitting on the bar. I put a a quarter wheat gel over it to sort of correct it, to get it closer to what the CFL box was cranking out. And then over that I laid a 251 gel, or a diffusion gel. And then to break it up, so that because I wanted the light here, but I didn't want it leaking. It was actually leaking over into some parts where I didn't want it to. And I only had the one light, so I couldn't use two lights. So I put a bar rag over the middle of the light, so that one end of the light, this highlight, here, let me get my pointer back. This highlight here, this part of the light would light her face from underneath to give her this really cool light. And then there'd be a gap, and then the other side of the light, which is this highlight here and here, would fill his face and give me the appropriate exposure. And then my other lights broke, and that's just the peril that sometimes happens. So the only other light I had left, I had a light creating moonlight over here, but that I couldn't move for continuity reasons, because we shot this other angle first. We shot her angle first. I had to leave that light there, so I couldn't move the light over here to give him the proper hair light that he needed, and the proper rim, and something that would cast all the way across his shoulder, from here into his hair, and down across his shoulder a little bit here, to sort of bring him out from the background. And as a result, this is actually, in my estimation, wrong. This is not the way this shot is supposed to look. He's supposed to be completely separated from the background. But the only light I had left was this camera light, this little LED camera light. It's got like 140 little LEDs in it, and it cranks out a ton of light. But the batteries were dying, and we couldn't maximize it, couldn't get it to maximize its light. So it's basically being held. The producer is actually standing right over here, and holding that light up here, and just blasting him with it as much as he can to get a little bit of rim light. So there's only really 3 lights here. Well, there's 4. There's the moonlight, which is coming from an RE650 on a stand about 12 feet away. The little softbox here on his face. The flow light on the counter, which is filling him and filling and keying her. And then little handheld camera light. I wish I'd had a light to cast some sort of light back here in the background. I would have loved to just sort of strafe this rack of bottles and this little entryway with a nice streak of light that could have been brought back in to have a little bit of detail back here, and then a nice light to light this pillar, which is kind of disappearing. Here in the corner you can kind of make out that it's still there, but this face is completely dark, and I didn't want that. But I ran out of lights, and I ran out of time. I mean, I could have rigged something, but I didn't have any time. The director's like, we have to be out in like 15 minutes, so we have to just get this shot and go. So that is the perils of low-budget filmmaking. You don't always get enough time to light the way you want to light. But Brian here is really easy to light, so we were able to light this. I think it took about 5 minutes to light. And then we just shot it out in 10 minutes, and then we had to get out of the bar because they were gracious enough to let us shoot there for free after hours. And so you take what you can get when you need locations, and this was a really cool location to kind of shoot in. But yeah, so that's what's coming. In the future, there will be tutorials. There'll be a whole new tutorial series. There'll be the ColorGhear only, just the grading series. But then there will be a filmmaking series, and that filmmaking series will contain a number of tutorials and guests. I'm going to be bringing in my friends in different areas of production, pre-production, and post-production. Everything from set construction to prop making, makeup effects, pouring and pulling molds, storyboarding, cinematography, not just myself, other cinematographers, visual effects, makeup, you name it, everything you've ever wanted to know about filmmaking on a low budget. I'm going to bring in guys who've done it on a low budget and guys that have done it on a big budget. And guys who've done both, so you can learn from some of the people that I know here in the industry. So you're probably thinking, well, that's really cool. I'm glad you're gonna add all of that content to the site. But what's it gonna cost me? Well, chances are, if you're watching this, you've already purchased ColorGhear and you already have a membership to the website. And if that's the case, it's not going to cost you a damn thing. It's going to be completely included with your membership. Your membership gives you access to both tutorial series, not only ColorGhear, but the filmmaking tutorial series. And my reasons for doing this are that there's a ton of stories out there um, that don't have the, I should say, liquidity or budget that many of the films made in Hollywood do, and I think they deserve the kind of production quality that maybe is outside the reach of most budgets. So I want to give you guys the tools to be able to tell your story in such a way that you don't have to make excuses for the way it looks. And that's really kind of what it's all about. And with that, enjoy this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Enjoy the ones to come. I'm going to work desperately today to try and get legacy support done so all of you CS4 users can finally enjoy ColorGhear the way everyone else has, instead of that limited version that I've given you. And I'm going to try and get the masking, the masks and tracking and grain reduction tutorials to. I'm probably going to have to completely re-record them because the Camtasia files are not cooperating. Thank you, Camtasia. Your software is great, but on that one particular, I don't know, for some reason it's just not exporting. So I will get those out as soon as possible. If you have any questions, email me at colorgear@gmail.com or contact me straight through the website. Please feel free to leave comments on the website and let other people who are coming here for the first time, at least coming to the homepage for the first time, know about your experience buying the software, using the software, watching the tutorials, and learning the things that you're learning. And don't be afraid to share this on other websites and message boards, etc. Spread the word, man. This information is for everyone. I want to make sure that it gets out to as many people as can get to it, and enrich their filmmaking lives to be able to do these kinds of things. So until next time, happy grading.